The mall was alive with energy that Saturday afternoon. Shoppers moved in and out of stores, the food court smelled of fresh pizza and buttery popcorn, and children ran past, laughing and playing. The air buzzed with conversation, the occasional ringtone, and the hum of background music. And right in the middle of it all was Shaquille O'Neal, better known as Big Shaq to fans who grew up watching him dominate the NBA. Standing at 7'1", wearing a black hoodie and loose-fitting jeans, he was hard to miss. People whispered, took pictures from a distance, and some even approached for a quick selfie. Shaq was used to it. He didn't mind. He loved people. In one hand, he held a smoothie, mango and strawberry, his favorite. In the other, his phone, a custom-made piece with a gold-plated case, his initials engraved on the back. The device was big, just like everything about him. And at that moment, as he scrolled through some messages, he had no idea someone was watching him. A boy. No older than 9 years old, dark-skinned, slim, and wearing clothes 2 sizes too big. His sneakers were beaten up, soles peeling off. His hair was unkempt, and his face held a look most people wouldn't recognize. Hunger. Fear. Desperation. He lurked in the crowd, eyes darting back and forth, studying Shaq's every movement. His small hands clenched and unclenched, his heart hammering inside his thin chest. He had stolen before, candy bars, sandwiches, even loose change left on tables in food courts. But never a phone. Not until today. He didn't know who Shaq was. He just saw a big man with a fancy phone, and in his world, that meant opportunity. The moment came when Shaq turned slightly, laughing at something on his screen. That's when the boy moved. Quick as a shadow, he slipped through the crowd and snatched the phone from Shaq's massive hand. His fingers barely wrapped around the device before he spun and ran, weaving through shoppers, dodging strollers, and squeezing past slow walkers. But he didn't get far. Shaq wasn't just big, he was fast. Decades of playing professional basketball had made sure of that. His reflexes kicked in before his mind even processed what happened. 1 step. 2 steps. And then he reached out and caught the boy by the back of his hoodie, lifting him clean off the ground like a sack of potatoes. People gasped. Some stopped to watch. The boy kicked and flailed, his small fists pounding Shaq's arm, but it was useless. Shaq barely felt it. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, easy now, little man," Shaq said, his deep voice rumbling like a distant storm. The kid struggled harder. "Let me go. Let me go." Shaq didn't. Instead, he turned him around, holding him by his arms so he could get a better look. The boy's face was tight with fear, his eyes filled with panic, but what caught Shaq off guard wasn't just the fear. It was the pain underneath it. This wasn't some spoiled kid trying to be a rebel. This was something else. Shaq slowly lowered him to the ground but kept a firm grip on his wrist. The phone was still in the kid's other hand, his fingers gripping it like his life depended on it. "You really want to do this, little man?" Shaq asked, his voice gentler now. The boy's lip trembled. He looked away. "Come on, now," Shaq said, crouching so they were eye level. "Look at me." The boy hesitated, then slowly lifted his gaze. "What's your name?" The boy's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Tyrese." "Tyrese, huh?" Shaq nodded. "Okay. I got a question for you, Tyrese. You hungry?" The boy frowned, confused. He was expecting anger. Yelling. Maybe even a call to security. But not this. His stomach growled in response. Shaq chuckled. "Yeah, thought so. People were still watching, whispering. A few had their phones out, recording. Shaq didn't care. This wasn't for the cameras. He reached out and gently took the phone from Tyrese's hand. The boy let go without a fight, his shoulders slumping like all the energy had drained from his body. "Come on," Shaq said, placing a huge hand on the boy's bony shoulder. "Let's get some food." Tyrese didn't move right away. He didn't trust it. "Why you serious?" he asked. Shaq smiled. "Dead serious." The boy's stomach growled again, louder this time. His fingers curled into the fabric of his oversized hoodie. And then, slowly, he nodded. Shaq draped an arm around the kid's shoulders and led him toward the food court, ignoring the curious stares. He didn't know what Tyrese's story was yet, but one thing was clear. This wasn't about a phone. It was about survival. And for some reason, Shaq knew, he couldn't just walk away. The food court smelled like heaven, hot, greasy, delicious heaven. The scent of sizzling burgers, crispy fries, and warm cinnamon rolls filled the air. People sat at tables, chatting, laughing, stuffing their faces with oversized meals. Tyrese followed Shaq with cautious steps, his eyes darting around like he expected this to be some kind of trap. He wasn't used to kindness. Every time someone had offered him something in the past, it had come with conditions. "What you want, lil' man?" Shaq asked as they stood in front of a fast food counter. Tyrese hesitated. His body screamed for food, but his mind whispered warnings. This was too easy. Too good to be true. Shaq sighed, squatting to meet Tyrese's eyes. "Look, I ain't playing games. You hungry, right?" Tyrese nodded slowly. "Then eat, man. Ain't nobody gonna snatch your food." That was the thing. Tyrese had stolen food before, grabbed leftover fries off tables when people left, snuck into gas stations to grab candy bars when nobody was looking. He was used to running after food, not having it given to him. Still, his hunger won the battle. "Chicken nuggets," he mumbled. "And fries. And a milkshake." Shaq smirked. "All right, now we talkin', dot." He turned to the cashier. "Give my guy here the biggest nuggets meal y'all got. And a large strawberry milkshake. Matter fact, double that. One for me, too." Tyrese's eyes went wide. The biggest meal? He had expected a small order, just enough to keep him quiet, but this? This was a feast. When the tray came, it was loaded. Nuggets, crispy fries, 2 steaming burgers, and a milkshake almost as tall as his face. Tyrese grabbed the food with both hands, following Shaq to an empty table in the corner. Shaq watched as the kid tore into the food like a starving animal. He didn't even breathe between bites, stuffing nuggets in his mouth 2 at a time, washing it down with gulps of milkshake. This wasn't a kid eating for pleasure, this was survival. Shaq let him eat. No questions. No comments. Just silence. Halfway through his meal, Tyrese finally slowed down. He licked his fingers, his small frame sinking into the chair as the warmth of a full belly settled in. Shaq leaned back. "Better?" Tyrese nodded, licking the last bits of salt from his fingers. "All right. Now talk to me," Shaq said. "Why you out here trying to snatch phones, man?" Tyrese tensed. The fear returned to his face. Shaq held up a hand. "Relax, lil' man. I ain't trying to get you in trouble. I just want to know." The boy looked away. His hands clenched into small fists on the table. "I needed the money," he whispered. Shaq nodded, waiting. My mom, Tyrese's voice wavered, but he forced himself to keep going. She's gone. She died last year. His fingers curled tighter. And my dad, he in prison. Shaq's chest tightened. He had expected a bad story. He hadn't expected this. Tyrese's voice was quiet now, almost like he didn't want to say the words out loud. Ain't got nobody, man. No grandma, no aunties, nobody. Shaq's jaw tightened. He had grown up in Newark, New Jersey. He knew what the streets could do to a kid like Tyrese. No parents. No home. Nobody looking out for him. So, you just out here on your own? Shaq asked, his voice softer now. Tyrese gave a small shrug. Been that way for a while. Shaq didn't say anything for a long moment. He just studied the boy. He had seen tough kids before, kids who had learned to survive the hard way. Tyrese had that same hardness in his eyes, but underneath, Shaq could still see the kid. The kid who was scared. The kid who never got to be a kid. Shaq exhaled through his nose. Where you sleep at? Tyrese's body went stiff. Shaq nodded, already knowing the answer. Street. Silence. Shaq let out a slow breath. This wasn't just some little kid acting out. This boy was fighting to survive. And Shaq had a choice. He could finish his food, give the kid some cash, and walk away. Or he could do something real. He rubbed his hands together, leaning forward. Aight, lil' man. Listen up. Tyrese looked at him warily. You ever heard of me? The kid shrugged. You some kind of football player? Shaq chuckled. Basketball. Tyrese's eyes flickered with the tiniest bit of interest. You in the NBA? Used to be. Won 4 championships. The boy's lips parted slightly. He wasn't a big sports fan, but 4 championships. That sounded important. Shaq smiled. I had everything, man. Money. Fame. Big houses. But you know what's more important? Tyrese frowned. What? People. Shaq tapped the table. People who got your back. People who look out for you. He pointed a huge finger at the boy. And right now, you ain't got that. But I'ma change that today. Tyrese sat up, his face unreadable. What you mean? Shaq smirked. Means you rollin' with me now, lil' man. You ain't gotta steal no more. The kid blinked. What, you mean like, for today? Shaq shook his head. Nah. I mean for real. I'ma help you. But you gotta be straight with me. No more stealing. No more runnin' the streets. Tyrese stared at him, speechless. Nobody had ever said anything like that to him before. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something warm in his chest. Hope. Tyrese sat in Shaq's massive SUV, his small frame nearly swallowed by the plush leather seat. The ride was smooth, the car silent except for the low hum of the radio. He clutched the seatbelt across his chest, staring out the window at the city streets. He still couldn't believe this was happening. He had spent the past year barely surviving, sleeping in abandoned buildings, sneaking into shelters when he could, and doing whatever it took to find his next meal. People ignored him, looked past him like he didn't exist. And now, out of nowhere, some basketball player was talking about helping him for real. Nah. It didn't make sense. Nobody did something for nothing. Tyrese glanced at Shaq, who was focused on the road, one massive hand gripping the steering wheel. His face was serious but calm, like he had already decided something and there was no changing his mind. Tyrese swallowed. He had learned to not trust people. Trust could get you hurt. And yet, this dude just bought him food, didn't yell at him for stealing, and now he was taking him, where, exactly? Tyrese shifted in his seat. So, where we goin'? Shaq glanced at him. Somewhere safe. Tyrese frowned. That wasn't an answer. Like, a shelter? Shaq shook his head. Nah. A police station? His stomach tensed at the thought. Shaq chuckled. Man, do I look like I'm talking you to the cops? Tyrese didn't answer. He wasn't sure. Shaq sighed, his deep voice filling the car. I got a place. You can stay there for a while. Get cleaned up. Rest. Tyrese narrowed his eyes. Stay where? A million thoughts ran through his mind. What if this was a setup? What if Shaq had some kinda hidden reason for doing this? You tryin' to adopt me or something? Tyrese asked, folding his arms. Shaq snorted. Boy, I got kids older than you. That actually made Tyrese smile, just a little. Shaq continued, his tone softer now. I ain't sayin' I'm gonna be your daddy. But I can be somebody who gives a damn. Tyrese bit his lip. That part hit different. They rode in silence for a while, the city blurring past them. Finally, Shaq pulled up in front of a huge house, not a mansion, but still way bigger than anything Tyrese had ever stepped foot in. His chest tightened. This is a mistake. He should bolt. He should jump out and run before. Come on, kid. Shaq was already out of the car, waiting. Tyrese hesitated, gripping the door handle. He could still run. But, where would he go? Slowly, he slid out of the car, stuffing his hands in his hoodie pocket as he followed Shaq up the driveway. Shaq pushed open the door, and Tyrese's eyes widened. Inside was warm. Not just in temperature, but in feeling. The place felt like a home. A big leather couch sat in the middle of a spacious living room. A TV, almost as big as a wall, was mounted on one side. The kitchen was open, with actual food stocked in the fridge, something Tyrese wasn't used to seeing. Most of all, it smelled clean. It didn't smell like mold, or cigarettes, or garbage. It smelled like safety. Shaq tossed his keys on the counter. You can sleep in the guest room. Ain't much, but the bed's clean, and there's fresh clothes in the closet. Bathrooms down the hall. Tyrese just stood there, his mind still trying to process everything. Shaq turned to him, his massive frame filling the doorway. Look, kid. You ain't gotta trust me right away. I get it. World done showed you some ugly stuff. He shrugged. But I ain't askin' you to sign a contract or nothin'. Just, try this. See what it's like to not have to fight for everything. Tyrese's throat tightened. His instincts told him this was a trap. That it was too good to be true. But another part of him, the part that was tired, the part that wanted to stop running, told him to just try. Okay, he mumbled. Shaq nodded. Aight. Now go get cleaned up, man. You smell like outside. Tyrese rolled his eyes, but for the first time in a long time, he almost laughed. Almost. Tyrese stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at himself. The reflection looking back wasn't one he recognized. For the first time in months, his face wasn't covered in a layer of dirt. His hair, usually dry and matted, now had some shine to it after a proper wash. The oversized hoodie he always wore, the one he'd been sleeping in for weeks, was finally off. In its place, he wore a simple gray t-shirt and black sweatpants that Shaq had given him. They were a little big, but at least they were clean. And yet, despite the fresh clothes, despite the warmth of the house, he still felt like a stranger standing there. Because the truth was, he wasn't used to this. Not the hot shower. Not the fresh clothes. Not the soft bed waiting for him in the guest room. Not the kindness. He pressed his hands against the sink, his breathing slow and steady. In the past, every time something good happened, something bad followed right after. That was just how his life worked. Maybe Shaq meant well, but people changed their minds. Tyrese knew that better than anybody. Taking one last deep breath, he flicked off the bathroom light and padded down the hallway. He kept his footsteps light, out of habit. When you lived on the streets, you learned not to draw attention to yourself. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of the TV playing in the background. As he stepped into the living room, he found Shaq sprawled on the couch, watching an old basketball game. The big man glanced up when he saw Tyrese. "Phew. Boy, I almost thought you drowned in there," Shaq teased, grinning. Tyrese smirked a little. "I ain't used to showers that stay hot that long." Shaq's smile faded slightly, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he patted the couch next to him. "Come sit." Tyrese hesitated before finally walking over. He sat on the far edge of the couch, not getting too close. Shaq reached for a pizza box on the coffee table, flipping it open. "You hungry again?" Tyrese's stomach growled before he could even answer. He had eaten earlier, but after months of never knowing when his next meal would come, his body wasn't used to this kind of comfort. Shaq chuckled, grabbing a slice and handing it to him. Tyrese took it cautiously before devouring it. They sat in silence for a while, watching the game. Every once in a while, Shaq would shake his head at the screen, muttering things like, "Man, that was a weak pass," or, "Come on, big fella, dunk that." Tyrese didn't know much about basketball, but it was nice, just sitting there, eating, not worrying about where he was going to sleep that night. After a while, Shaq turned to him. "You ever played?" Tyrese blinked. "Huh? Basketball. You ever hooped before?" Tyrese shook his head. "Not really." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "What? Man, you too old to not know ball. That's against the rules in America." Tyrese chuckled a little. Shaq pointed at him. "Aha. Gotcha. You do know how to laugh." Tyrese's smile faded, and he looked down at his pizza. "Yeah, well, ain't had much to laugh about." Shaq leaned back on the couch, resting his giant hands on his stomach. "I hear that." Silence stretched between them. Then, Shaq spoke again, his voice low and serious this time. "Look, man. I don't know everything you've been through. But I know this, life can throw some real ugly stuff at you. I know what it's like to feel like you gotta fight for everything just to survive." Tyrese clenched his jaw. "Yeah. You had it bad too." Shaq nodded. "Not like you. I had a mom, I had food on the table. But I wasn't always rich. Grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Lot of people there don't make it out." He sighed. "I had a stepdad who made sure I stayed straight. Made sure I didn't throw my life away." Tyrese's voice was quiet. "Must be nice." Shaq turned his head to look at him. "Yeah, it was. But you know what I learned? Ain't everybody lucky enough to have somebody like that." Tyrese stayed quiet. Shaq leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. That's why I'ma help you, Tyrese. Not 'cause I feel sorry for you. Not 'cause I'm trying to make myself feel good. But because somebody did it for me. And now it's my turn to do it for you. Tyrese tensed. There it was. The catch. His hands curled into fists. Yeah. And how long, till you get tired of me? How long, till I mess up and you send me away? Shaq's brows furrowed. That what happened to you before? Tyrese swallowed hard but didn't answer. Shaq nodded, like he understood. Alright, I get it. You been let down before. But I ain't them. Tyrese let out a dry laugh. That's what they all say. Shaq didn't argue. He just studied the boy, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. I can't make you trust me, Tyrese. That's gotta be your choice. Tyrese turned his face away, his chest tight. He wanted to believe him. He really did. But trusting people? That was dangerous. He set his half-eaten pizza down and stood up. I'm tired, he muttered. I'ma go to sleep. Shaq nodded slowly. Aight, lil' man. Room's yours. Ain't nobody gonna take it from you. Tyrese hesitated, then walked down the hall, feeling more confused than ever. He had spent so long keeping his walls up, but for the first time, he wondered what it would be like to let them down. Tyrese couldn't sleep. He lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind running in circles. The sheets were soft. The pillows smelled like fresh laundry. The whole room felt too safe, too comfortable. It didn't feel real. He kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe Shaq would change his mind in the morning. Maybe he'd wake up and be right back where he started, on the streets, alone. That's how it always happened. People saw him, felt bad, and gave him something, a meal, a little cash, maybe a ride to a shelter. But nobody ever stayed. Nobody ever made him feel like he mattered. With a sigh, he turned over, staring at the clock. 3:12 a.m. He needed air. Quietly, he pushed back the blankets and tiptoed toward the door. The house was silent, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the fridge. He crept through the hallway, moving like a shadow. Old habits. Then, he saw Shaq, sitting in the darkened living room, a single lamp glowing beside him. The big man was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, scrolling through his phone. Tyrese froze. Shaq glanced up. Couldn't sleep. Tyrese hesitated, then shrugged. Yeah. Shaq motioned toward the couch. Come sit. For a second, Tyrese considered bolting back to his room. But something in Shaq's voice, something calm, steady, made him sit down instead. Shaq set his phone down. What's on your mind, lil' man? Tyrese clenched his hands together. Just, thinking. About what? Tyrese hesitated. Then, quietly, he said, that this ain't gonna last. Shaq didn't react right away. He just nodded, like he had been expecting that answer. Tyrese exhaled sharply. Ain't nobody ever wanted to keep me around before. They say they do. They act like they care. But after a while, they change their mind. Shaq's deep voice was calm but firm. You think I'm like them? Tyrese shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. Shaq studied him for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. You ever hear about the cycle? Tyrese frowned. What cycle? The cycle of being stuck. Shaq's eyes locked onto his. I know what it's like, Tyrese. I seen it before. People grow up hard, they lose hope, and they start thinking they ain't meant for more. So they stay stuck. They think the only thing waiting for them is the same thing they've been living through. Tyrese swallowed. Shaq tapped his own chest. I could have been stuck too. Lotta kids where I grew up. They ain't make it out. But my stepdad. He taught me that life ain't about what you start with, it's about what you do with it. Tyrese looked down at his hands. Yeah, well, that's easy for you to say. You rich. You famous. Shaq chuckled. You think I was born rich? Nah, man. I was just a tall, goofy kid from Newark. But I worked my ass off. I found people who wanted me to win, and I listened to them. He tapped Tyrese's shoulder. And now? I want you to win. Tyrese clenched his jaw. Why? You don't even know me. Shaq's face softened. Because somebody once did it for me. And because I know you ain't got nobody else. Tyrese swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. Shaq leaned back. Look, kid. You can leave if you want to. I ain't locking no doors. You can go back to the streets. Back to stealing, back to fighting every day just to eat. He paused. Or, you can break the cycle. Tyrese blinked. How? Shaq smiled. You let me teach you. Tyrese frowned. Teach me what? Shaq grinned. First, we teach you how to play some damn basketball. Tyrese let out a short, surprised laugh. Man, I ain't no basketball player. Shaq shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. But you need something to focus on. Something to believe in. Tyrese hesitated. The idea of having something, anything, to put his energy into felt strange. Shaq continued. And then, we figure out the rest. School. Home. A future. You ain't gotta have all the answers today. Tyrese looked down, his mind spinning. For the first time in a long time. He wanted to believe. Shaq studied him. So. What's it gonna be, lil' man? Tyrese took a deep breath. His hands were still shaking, but he looked up at Shaq and nodded. Okay. Shaq grinned. Okay. And just like that, the cycle started to break.